Hi guys, this is Shayna from YumiYarns.com, and I am back today with our first video in our Toe Up Socks class, which is super exciting. So there are a lot of steps in today's class because unlike the cuff down socks that start you off pretty simply with just cast on, ribbing, leg, and then you start doing fancy stuff with the heel, toe up socks, you start right out of the gate with all sorts of fun things. So we're going to get busy here because there are a lot of little mini tutorials tucked inside this one. Today I'll be using the Suburban Stitcher Sock Yarn in her Sea Smoke colorway, and it's this really pretty white color with blue speckles, and then she's also, it's not showing up as great on the camera, but there's also these really pretty like light gray flashes, and there's little hints of there's some pinky red and yellow, but they're very, very few and far between, and it's just a really pretty color. It's gonna make really gorgeous socks. And Diane was nice enough to send that to me to use for the tutorials. So if you guys want to go support her, I've got links down below. You can get the same colorway from her. She does amazing yarn colors. She's also our indie dyer, our featured indie dyer for the Indie Sock Along for this month. And the Indie Sock Along is a year-long knit-along that we're doing featuring indie dyers. Each month a new sock pattern that I wrote is going to be released, and each month we have a different featured indie dyer with a live event with them at the beginning of the month, and it's just kind of a fun way to celebrate the vast array of dyers that we get to work with and the beautiful things that they make for us. And I've got links to everything down below in the show notes for you. And like I said, for this month it's $2. Next month it will be $4. The month after it'll be $6 to join the Indie Sock Along, because you get all the previous patterns that have already been released right away. So just so that you're aware, that way you can jump on it sooner rather than later and get the cheaper pricing. So today we're going to jump right into it. For toe up socks, we're going to be starting with Judy's Magic Cast On. And for that, we're going to need about a foot of yarn. So I'm not sure what that converts to in metric, but basically about, I don't know, from your elbow to your wrist is definitely plenty. And normally, if you've watched my other videos, you'll know that I try to avoid adding slip knots into my projects. But with Judy's Magic Cast On, you can use the trick that I've shown you before, but for this tutorial, I'm going to use a slip knot because it's a lot easier and it doesn't slide off the needle quite as easily. So, to do a slip knot, hold your ball end of the yarn here, wrap the tail around your finger, hold it down with your thumb, grab the ball end, slide it into that loop on your finger, pull it tight. So we've got our slip knot. So normally when you're doing a long tail cast on, you want it like this, where your ball end is here, your tail end is here. For Judy's Magic Cast On, it's going to be reversed. So tail here, ball here. But we need a needle. So I'm going to add our needle into the works. Again, tail at the top, ball at the bottom. And I'm actually going to do this so you have one more visual. Ball end is at the bottom. And we're going to grab our second needle. I'm using Addi Flexi Flips because they're one of my favorite types of needles. You can do this with Magic Loop, DPNs, all sorts of different ones. For the cast on portion, Magic Loop or Flexies are going to be a lot easier because they have this cable. You can do it with DPNs. It's just going to be tighter when you're trying to knit into it on the first round. So just be aware of that. So what we're going to do, we've got our needle with the slip knot towards the back and our secondary needle towards the front. And we're kind of going to be making a figure 8 with the yarns around the needle. So we have one stitch. I'm going to be making 64 stitch socks, which that's the width that it's going to be around the foot and around the leg. So I need to cast on 16 stitches, not 18. I need 8 stitches on each needle eventually, but 16 stitches total. So since we already have one on this needle, we're going to put one on here because we're going to alternate between needles. And to do that, I'm going to hold my slip knot in place with my index finger and take my needles and wrap that tail end from that bottom to the top, outside to inside, around the needle that's farthest away from the yarn. And now we're going to do the other one. So since it's on my thumb, we know it's going to be on the needle that's farthest away from me. And it's going to go from the bottom to the top, outside to inside. So now we've got 3 stitches, and we're just going to go back and do the same thing that we did initially with the first one. And back to this one. Oops. You kind of get into a rhythm with it. So underneath, over the top, down through the middle. Underneath, over the top, down through the middle. Underneath, the top, down through the middle. And I've got 5 stitches on each needle. I need 16 stitches total, so I need to do 6 more stitches. Let's see. And we are even on our stitches, so oops. Sometimes that'll happen. It can get a little bit tight as you go, so just pay attention to where your yarns are going and slow down if you need. It's not a race. Here we go. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Perfect. We've got 8 on the other side, so we are ready to go. So our tail yarn, so that last stitch there was the tail yarn. We want to lock that in place. So we're going to bring the tail to the front, turn, actually I'm going to show you this really quick. So you can kind of see how it's creating the start of our toe. And that's the inside because it's got the purl bumps. So we know that's the inside of our sock. So we want to start knitting across on this row so that this row turns into the inside. So we're going to turn this way. Oops. And pull this front needle through so that those stitches are on the cable, because that'll make it a lot easier. If you're on DPNs, you're just going to kind of have to work with it. And I want you to notice what I did with my tail here. This stitch started getting a little bit loose, so I kind of just pulled it taut to tighten it up again. And we want to lock that one down, so we're going to work into that first stitch here. But we want to make sure that our yarn that's connected to the ball wraps around the outside of the tail, otherwise it's not going to lock in. So now we can look at these stitches, and if you notice, they're all oriented the correct way. It's a little bit hard to tell with the tightness of the fabric here, but the front leg of the stitch, so the side point, or the right side of the stitch, is pointing to the right, and the back side of the stitch, so the one on the wrong side, pointing to the left. And that's how you can tell if your stitches are the right way or the wrong way. So we don't need to worry, they're all facing the right way. So we're going to knit across these stitches. And if that first stitch gets a little bit loose, that's okay. You can just tug on the tail a little bit to tighten it up. There we go. So we've got all 10 stitches knit on there, or not 10, I'm sorry, all 8 stitches. And if you're on DPNs or mini circs, which you shouldn't be on a mini circ at this point, that would be impossible. But you can place a marker here to let you know that that's not your beginning of round, that's just your halfway point. I'm just going to be using my tail as my marker since I don't want to clutter up the screen for you guys while I'm knitting the tutorials. But that's also, you can use that as your beginning of round marker. And you'll notice I have a really long tail. That's totally fine. It's better to have too much than too little when you're doing your cast on. Oops. Sorry, I didn't mean to shake you guys. Okay, so now we're going to switch to the next needle. So we're going to pull that through. This is the one we knit. We pulled that through so it's on the cable. And we're going to put these stitches onto our cable here, or onto our needle portion. And it's harder to tell, but the stitches on this side are actually twisted. And that's just because of the nature of the cast on. So if we just knit straight across these, you would see a difference in your stockinette fabric. It's not a huge difference, and it is just the toe of the sock, but it does cinch up the yarn more, so your stitches are going to be a lot tighter and your gauge is going to get weird if you continue in that fashion. So we're actually going to knit into the back leg of these stitches. Once I can get it here. This is the one with the slip knot, so it's a little bit tight. There we go. So we're just going to knit into the back leg of all the stitches, and you can kind of see a little bit easier here how that one is twisted around, because the leg that's on the wrong side is trying to point to the right, and the leg that's on the right side is trying to point to the left, and you want that front leg to be pointing to the right. Oops. All right. So we have our first round of our toe done. It's a tiny little baby section of stockinette, but it is there and it's perfect. We're so excited. So the next thing we need to do, now that we've got our setup finished, we are going to do our round one, excuse me. And so I'm just going to turn my work, and I'm actually going to pull my tail out. Normally I let it stay on the inside of the sock because that's even less work for me to do in finishing up. But since I'm using it as my marker for this sock, I am just going to pull it out so that it's hanging there. And I am going to break it a little because it's really long. That way it doesn't get in the way. But I'm going to let it hang out on the outside of the sock so I can see where my beginning of round is. And so we're going to start our increases. And I'm going to zoom you guys in just a little. There we go. So we always want to do our first stitch as just a knit stitch, because it looks weird if you have the increases right on the edge. It doesn't lay as nicely. So we're going to do our increase here. Now this first one is a make one right. So we're going to be learning make one right and make one left. And I have my little cheat sheet pulled up so that I can make sure that I don't misspeak on this one, because this can be a source of confusion. So to make one right, we're going to actually work into this little bar between the stitches here. And for the right, we're going to use our left needle, and we're going to go from back to front. Whoops, get you centered again, sorry. Under that little bar between the stitches. And so now we've got this extra stitch on there. If we just knit into that, that's going to make a hole, which if you're wanting that, that's fine, but we don't want that in the toe right now. So we're going to fix that. And what we're going to do is we're going to knit into the right side leg, so this one, because that will twist the stitch. And in this case, we do want to twist it because we want to close it up. And it will also make our stitch lean to the right. And it can be a little bit tricky, but I have faith in you. Oh, and sometimes you split the yarn. There we go. And you slide it off, and there's your make one right. And now we're going to knit across to one stitch before the end. And I apologize for any scratching of my needles on the paper. Sometimes it cannot be avoided. Okay, so now we're going to make one left. Weird how that works, huh? So we have our make one right on this side, we'll have our make one left on this side, and we're going to do the left needle again, and we're going to insert it from front to back this time between that bar, or under that bar between the stitches. And this time we're going to be knitting that back leg to twist the stitch. So see how this one, it kind of leans to the right, the leg does, and this one, I'll knit this next stitch here so you can see a little bit better. That one kind of leans to the left. You can see just slightly there. It doesn't show up quite as much in just one stitch, but over the course of the toe, you will see a difference. And that's always kind of fun. It's kind of like magic when it starts shaping and looking correct. So we're done with that first needle. So we're gonna go to this side. And knit our first stitch. And then we're going to do our make one right, which is left needle, back to front, and knit that first one there, and knit across. Our last stitch, and then we're going, this is another way you can do it if you are more dexterous with your right. You can scoop that one up with the right hand one. Just make sure that you place it on the needle correctly. So for the make one left, you want it set up so that you can work into that back leg. Oops. And sometimes I'll do that so that it loosens up and is a little bit easier to work. There you go. So there's our increase round. And it's kind of like working the cuff down socks in reverse. We're going to do a few rounds where it's just increase rounds until we get a quarter of our stitches on the needles. So since I'm doing a 64 stitch sock, that means I'm going to work increase rounds until I have a total of 32 stitches or 16 stitches on both needles. And then I'll alternate just a knit round with an increase round until I have my full 64 stitches or 32 stitches on each needle. And at that point we'll be ready for the foot. So I'm going to leave us there for today. I'm going to finish up my toe, and then tomorrow we will have our tutorial for, oh, that's kind of a weird look, huh? Sorry. Tomorrow we will have our tutorial for doing the foot of our toe-up socks. If you're enjoying these tutorials and want to keep seeing more, be sure to like the video and subscribe. And if you want to be notified when the new ones come up, hit the bell for notifications. You can also sign up for my newsletter at yumiyarns.com. I send out a weekly newsletter on Wednesdays, usually trying to include tutorials and patterns and stuff like that. Most of the time there's a special promotion for my newsletter subscribers and information about Zoom meetups and different things like that. So all sorts of fun things, nothing spammy or weird, just good stuff. And yeah, tomorrow should be a lot of fun. The foot's always exciting because you're done doing all the heavy lifting right away with toe-up socks, and you can kind of coast from there on out. And so, yeah, I hope you guys have a great day and happy knitting, and I will see you tomorrow. Bye!